welcome in. Thanks so much for joining me again. So in this episode, I'm going to continue on a series on one of my favorite Buddhist texts called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path. If you weren't able to watch part one, I recommend going back and checking that out first, as that's going to prepare the ground for what we're going to talk about today. But either way, this is open to everyone. One of the reasons I chose this text is because it's complete. It more or less presents the entire Buddhist path. It's non-sectarian. It does it in a way that whatever lineage you practice in, whatever vantage point you're coming from, you can find something useful here and appropriate for your meditation and Buddhist practice. And also, I just like the profundity of this practice, sort of you get a big bang in a small package, big bang for your buck in a small package, because it's quite short. It's only 14 verses, though I'm going through it slowly. So this will be part 2 in this series, and we'll see. I don't know how long it will go, but we'll see. So anyways, big warm welcome. And what I wanted to start off with is reviewing a bit of what we talked about in part 1, just for a minute or so. And then I'll start to go into some of the verses and content moving forward. So in part 1, if you watched it or if you didn't watch it, basically I gave an overview of the background of this text. The author is Lama Tsongkhapa, who is one of the, I guess we could say, sort of most revered figures in Tibetan Buddhism. He started the Gelugpa tradition, which is one of the 5 main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, and he's very much revered, generally by most Tibetans in a non-sectarian spirit as one of their saints, essentially. He's known as an emanation of Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, and you can go read about his life a little bit more. I talked about it a little bit in part 1, and especially that often he gets pigeonholed as a scholar, but actually, when you look at his life, he was mostly a meditator and did a lot of retreat, like hours and hours and months and years of retreat. And then, was an incredible voice, especially on the Prajnaparamita or the perfection of wisdom teachings of the Buddha. So more or less, I talked about that, as well as kind of what these 3 principal aspects of the path are, why they're meaningful. We'll go into that a little bit more in this episode. But basically, we have the cultivation of renunciation mind, the cultivation of aspirational bodhicitta or relative bodhicitta, and then we have the cultivation of wisdom in the form of emptiness or Buddhist non-duality. And these 3 principal aspects of the path are what essentially lead us to freedom from a Buddhist perspective. It's what as we realize these, as we become these, essentially, we move closer and closer to Buddhahood or awakening. So as I said, everything's contained in this text. And then, of course, to practice it, we may need to go elsewhere and studying different commentaries and receiving teachings. But nonetheless, it's here. So in last episode, in part 1 of this series, besides going into the background of Lama Tsongkhapa, more on this text, as I just said, we left off on the first official verse after the homage, which is the promise to compose, which is a traditional way someone of Lama Tsongkhapa's caliber, someone who's writing these kinds of texts, is going to both, make a firm intention to write this and complete this for the benefit of all beings, as well as to set up who the audience is, right? And that continues into the second verse, which is kind of an extension of that, but it's also asking us to listen to the dharma in a certain way. And I remember first when I heard these kinds of approaches, I didn't pay that much attention to them because I thought, okay, great, let's get to the main part, right? And then over the years, I realized this is quite important. So I'm just going to spend a few moments on kind of breaking down some of the meaning of the words here. So here's verse 2. Quote, "You who are unattached to samsara's pleasures and strive to make full use of the freedoms and advantages, You who follow the path delighting all the Buddhas, fortunate ones, listen well with a clear and open mind. Okay. So, again, as I said, if I can remember correctly, in the last episode, part 1, some of the language here can be quite, religious. So, if we have a slight allergy to that, use the language more as questions as opposed to statements. And again, I highly recommend kind of digging into some of the words here and what they might mean rather than sort of assuming what they might mean. And of course, one of the reasons I'm doing this is to explain them a little bit from my understanding and the teachings of my teachers that I've received on this, but also to sort of break this down in a way where as modern meditators, we can start to connect with things like this in non-dogmatic ways. Not that this text is dogmatic at all, but I think sometimes with the language, we can take it that way, right? I know I have before. I'm not sure if you are or will, but that's happened to me. So that's the reason I'm bringing it up, where I think it's much more useful to read these lines and find exploration in them. Use them with, use curiosity as a form of, okay, what does that really mean? What is he pointing to there? How do I bring this into my practice? So that's kind of the spirit of how I'd like to approach this. So, right away, one could say, well, I'm very attached to samsara's pleasures, so maybe this text isn't for me, right? So again, we could jump too far to another conclusion and miss out on all the wonderful beauty of practicing this text. But either way, what Lama Tsongkhapa is doing here is kind of saying the ideal practitioner, right? And I don't know about you, I am probably not an ideal student or practitioner. I'm an aspiring one, right? Which I'm fine with at this point. And so what it means to me, that first, you who are unattached to samsara's pleasures, it means I'm working towards that. And for some of you, unfamiliar with this language, this word samsara is a, excuse me, this word samsara is a big one because it basically represents life. It represents our current state of perceiving, experiencing, thinking, feeling life. And when we initially come across this term, it's, I guess you could say, bad news. But as a lot of things in Buddhism, there's bad news to open up good news, right? Meaning, once we can recognize a certain predicament or problem happening, we can remedy it, right? We can actually actively do something else. So that's the reason it's being brought up here. And also this sense of unattached. It's basically saying that we don't see that samsara, finding satisfaction, conclusion. The translator chose the word pleasures here. Basically, I like the word satisfaction, that we can't find satisfaction in samsaric mind. So one thing I'm going to start introducing here, because we're in the renunciation verses for the next 3 or 4 verses, these can be sometimes sound quite heavy-handed. So we have to come back to our own experience. As I usually say, we have to come back to our side of the street, where when we hear about samsara, we can think of it as this outer thing. And yes, you could say, like, collectively with other beings, we experience what looks like an outer world. And that has the components of samsara, meaning nothing quite leads to satisfaction. I think this is kind of one of the best ways in, right? Of course, when we really get into the teachings, we're talking about, different realms we can be born in and out of and all of that. But if we don't get the initial point, that teaching might not land well later on. And the initial point is that the mind is churning, circling on itself again and again and again. And we're repeating habits and behaviors again and again and again that are not leading to genuine satisfaction. And what this means is even the small pleasures, they don't last, right? So this isn't saying we can't enjoy a good meal and get pleasure out of that. It just means we're going to be looking for another one at a certain point. So what's unique about the Buddhist path is it seeks, I guess you could say, some sort of resolution for that lack of fuller satisfaction and peace, which from a Buddhist perspective is our nature. It's not some heaven we go to necessarily. It's our own nature of mind. It's our own nature of what and who we are. if we could, if I could say it that way. And so when we're recognizing samsara's pleasures or the satisfactoriness of that, and we're questioning that, then we can actually practice the path well and correctly, because we're going to be looking for a more lasting aim in the form of enlightenment or Buddhahood. So this is a big idea, but just to start to get our head around this, otherwise the renunciation mind teachings won't make much sense. So in general, they're not about pushing away outward things. If we need to do that as a support, that's fine. That's why we have monastic life in Buddhism, is by cutting off a relationship to sort of, romantic relationships, raising families, etc. That can serve a practitioner, but it's not the only way to do it, right? It's just a helpful tool. So what I'm saying here is when we're studying these renunciation teachings, we don't want to lose the forest for the trees, right? We don't want to get lost in the specificities as opposed to the general idea of what we're pursuing here. And the general idea is we're trying to recognize what the predicament actually is, which is that we're seeking to get, generally, I don't know about you, for me, a lot of the time, I'm trying to get, oil or water out of sand, which is impossible. But I keep seeking it and seeking it and seeking it, in small and larger ways. And this is almost like an addiction or a habit of the mind we need to start to question. And then we can start to break and find more long-lasting satisfaction in the form of the dharma and all the experiences and eventually realization we can develop through meditation. So that's kind of what this is pointing out. So it's tough here because each line is actually like a whole universe here. So I'm trying to, for me, I don't want to linger on one line for 10 episodes. So, but starting to seed the ground for some of you who are newer to this, or if you've already received teachings on this, but are misunderstanding or having trouble relating to it, I'd like to break that down as we proceed. So when we're not seeking to get, oil from sand or water from sand, then we strive to make full use of our freedoms and advantages, which is the next part of the verse. This goes into a deeper teaching on what we call a precious human rebirth. This would be the qualities of a precious human rebirth. But just to sum it up so we can move on, basically our human life. From a Buddhist perspective, our human body and life is incredibly useful. Let's put it that way. It's like a vehicle for attaining enlightenment if we wish to. And they usually say this is quite unique because there are other circumstances which, we can see around us, like the animal kingdom, etc., the animal world, animal kingdom, etc. We can see they don't necessarily have the freedoms and advantages to practice the dharma. Now, some people get upset at that. That doesn't mean animals are bad. It doesn't mean, we have the right to demean them or anything. No, we actually, because of that, we should actually have more compassion for them and then try to help them, right? And they're not stuck there forever. That's the point. But we do have to recognize the opportunity we have, and sometimes we have to recognize that in relation to other things, right? And I know this is tough for people. I've had students who struggle with this part of it. But we're not judging somebody else. We're not judging our dog. We're just recognizing, can they practice the full path to awakening or not? Can they meditate? Can they study the Dharma, etc., right? And this is just to recognize what we have. Now, if you just want to recognize what you have and not compare it to anyone else, great, go ahead and do that. But these freedoms and advantages, they're lists of 8 and 10, so 8 freedoms and 10 advantages. The freedoms would be the circumstances we're not in. For instance, bodies and births that we can't practice the Dharma in, or states of mind that would be incredibly difficult to practice the Dharma with. So basically, 8 freedoms are about recollecting or understanding what we have, what we're free of. And then the advantages, the 10 advantages, 5 are universal, meaning like a Buddha has taught the Dharma exists. There are practitioners attaining realization still these days, resources for us to learn and study from. And then there's there's more circumstances, there's more advantages that are more personal, right? Having an interest in this, seeing it as valuable to practice the Dharma, study the Dharma, meditate on it, etc. Anyways, like I said, you can search for these online. I don't want to get bogged down in them, but basically it just means we can use our human life in a positive way. So we should strive to. So there's always sort of, again, as I said before, we have to read these verses carefully, because when they're pointing out something that we may feel is negative or a bummer, to put it in plainly, that, oh, I'm really attached to samsara, right? And samsaric mind and those mind states and emotions and thoughts that spin, we can also recognize that we have this opportunity. So we're recognizing, okay, here's the predicament. We're stuck in this, this circling in samsara again and again. But right now we have the freedoms and advantages of having a precious human rebirth. So we should strive to make use of them. So there's always sort of recognizing, okay, here's the predicament, and then now use this to, essentially confront that predicament and transcend it. So then it says, you who follow the path delighting all the Buddhas, right? So this would be more or less a practitioner who's interested in the Dharma and awakening, as well as has bodhicitta, which we're going to study a little bit later, meaning has a wish to help others, has a wish to serve others through our own awakening, through our own path. What we heal and transform in ourselves becomes how we can serve others, meaning we can serve others more deeply when we're not bogged down by our afflictive emotions and samsaric attachments and all of that, right? So that would be someone who's delighting the Buddhas. Also, I think, in this kind of religious spiritual idea, the Buddhas they want to see us be free. They want to see us also be Buddhas. That's the whole purpose of the Buddhist path. And so I think they delight every time we move an inch towards that, right? Or even read a line of text, because it will ripen eventually in our awakening. So we can kind of have some constructive belief in that. So then it says, fortunate ones listen well with a clear and open mind. And this last line is what I was referring to as something quite important that I didn't really take too seriously. And this has to do with something called avoiding the three types of vessels, which is a very traditional way of giving a Dharma teaching, where a teacher, before they go into the main topic, they're going to recommend we avoid being, let's say, first, like a leaky vessel. I forget the order of these, so I'll just go in what order I remember. A leaky vessel, which would be, you're pouring water into a cup, but there's a hole in it, so all the water goes out, right? So this would mean kind of listening to a Dharma teaching, but immediately forgetting it and not applying it, right? Then the next one is being like a vessel that's turned upside down. So if the cup is turned upside down, we can't pour water into it. I think this one is, obviously, like, being a leaky vessel, unless we're kind of, some people like to take notes and things like that, so they're not as leaky. But this is a challenge for all of us because we forget, right? So we have to listen to the Dharma again and again. But the upturned vessel, this is something we can work with actively. And this is sort of, I put into the category of either not interested, but of course you wouldn't be listening to this if you weren't interested. And so I don't think that's happening for you. But it can also go into the category of sort of like too much doubt. So when we study the Dharma, healthy skepticism is welcome, right? Of course, it has to be. And this is what he means by a clear and open mind. Clear means sort of actually analyzing what you're hearing, like contemplating it, right? And an open mind means not too much doubt. So what's too much doubt? This is kind of personal. I can't tell you what it looks like for you. But too much doubt is, how I measure this is when we're not open to something. Already, like, our doubts come and then we close to something. So what I usually say is doubt itself is not a problem, but when we allow doubt to stop us, meaning it stops an inquiry or a process of curiosity, then it turns into something harmful, right? Because we can't move forward with something. So maybe skepticism is a better word. So healthy skepticism is, okay, I'm not sure about this, but we continue on a path of inquiry. We continue to listen, we continue to learn, we continue to investigate or examine, in this case, the teachings, right? So it's very, very important. As the Buddha said, we should investigate his teachings or the Dharma like we would test a piece of earth or rock to see if it's gold or not. So we're going to cut it, we're going to rub it, we're going to burn it, we're going to wash it. And so we do the same process with the Dharma. And basically what this is saying is we don't blindly believe in what we're hearing or reading here. But also we don't sort of stay blind in our own doubt. You see what I'm saying? So there's two extremes here. So that would be an upturned vessel. And then you could also relate that to the third aspect of avoiding being a dirty vessel. This would mean sort of a cup where you can pour water into it, but it's got a bunch of dirt at the bottom. So as soon as you pour water into it, the water's dirty. And this has to do with wrong motivation. And often this would be described as sort of sometimes in the past, I'm not sure how much now, people would learn Dharma just to sort of grow their egos and sort of ability to debate others or, tell others they're wrong or something like that, or to use it against someone. So basically the motivation is not correct because it's not they weren't interested in using the Dharma to look at their own beliefs and their own clinging and to remove the causes of suffering for themselves. They were interested in sort of fighting others. I doubt any of you are here for that, but this is kind of similar to what I just mentioned with the upturned vessel. In a modern way, we can hold beliefs that are quite strong, and we can, if we're inflexible with those beliefs, then it can be like when we mix the Dharma with that, everything gets mixed up and sort of not only murky, but we might go in the wrong direction with the teaching. So how do we avoid this? We keep a clear and open mind. And through mindful awareness, this is actually a practice, is what I discovered over some years. Through mindful awareness, we actually learn to watch our judgments and thoughts and all of what we believe. And this is so helpful because it's not just about believing something else. In this case, the teachings here, the Dharma. It's also about seeing our own beliefs and seeing what kinds of beliefs we hold, which sometimes we're just not aware of. They can be quite unconscious and we're not aware they're even there. So a lot of meditation or mindfulness is about understanding and seeing our own judgments and thoughts. And I'm not saying that that's usually not a pleasurable thing, but it's necessary at this level of practicing because then we can change, we can transform. So ultimately, again, bad news, okay, I've got all these judgmental thoughts over here. Good news, I can change them, right? So we have to balance always sort of bad news with good news. So that also is what's implied with a clear and open mind and avoiding these three types of vessels as we listen. So let's go on to verse 3. So verse 3 is setting up our exploration of renunciation mind. So from one of my teachers, I really like how he adds on the word mind. So Dzongtsar Khyentse Rinpoche, he doesn't just usually refer to the teachings on renunciation and their practices as developing renunciation. He adds on the word mind, as I'm also using renunciation mind. And that struck me as very skillful, and that's the reason I'm using it here, is because renunciation isn't just a physical and verbal act, it's a state of mind that we're developing. And not just one state, it's actually many different kinds of states of mind. But it's basically a mind that is becoming more and more exhausted with the status quo of how and what we seek happiness in, right? So again, going back to what I previously said about samsaric pleasure, or in the previous verse, working with samsaric mind, we're talking about the same thing here. We need to, through studying the Dharma, through meditating and contemplating on it, we slowly start to see, oh wow, like a lot of my habits and what I look to for happiness actually do not produce that. And then we start to develop a sense of exhaustion with the status quo of how we think, believe, act, speak, all of that, right? But this comes from the mind first. Otherwise, if we just say renunciation, we can think renunciation just means going and living in a hole somewhere on a mountain. But if we don't change our mind, that's not necessarily useful, right? That actually can become harmful if we don't change our mind first. So I like adding on this word renunciation mind, okay? So verse 3 goes like this, and this is, setting up the purpose of generating renunciation. So, quote, "While it's lacking pure renunciation, there's no way to pacify the continual thirst for pleasure in the ocean of samsara. And since all living beings are bound by their craving for existence, you must begin by finding the determination to be free." Wonderful. So again, good news at the end of the verse, right? So let's kind of start there. What does freedom mean? And again, we're going to unpack this as we continue in the text, especially when we get to the verses on Buddhist non-duality or emptiness. That's when we're really starting to understand what freedom looks like, right? So first of all, the way we're working with freedom within the renunciation mind teachings is more or less just seeing where we're getting caught, as I was saying. And this is a step-by-step process for most of us. I don't know if it's even possible to see all of the places we get caught. I find new ones every day, right? So there needs to be a little bit of, obviously, humility. I think I would even venture to say some playfulness in this area. As we already said, like open-mindedness, definitely compassion and kindness towards ourselves. Because when we question in this area, we start to see patterns that we're not going to like. We start to see, both in the sense that we can see what's causing our suffering as we look, but we also see habit patterns that we're attached to and we like, and we don't want to give them up, right? So my whole approach is generally compassion for all of that, having some kindness, love, a sense of warmth towards ourselves. And also, how do you say it? There needs to be sort of energy towards changing that, but also patience and forbearance to sort of do that over our lifetime. As for most of us, this is not something we unwind within a short period of time. I mean, if you can, wonderful. I rejoice. And there are practitioners out there who just had that kind of merit and karma coming from the past. They could just sort of quit, a lot of their samsaric behaviors pretty quickly. But for most of us, this is challenging. So either way, I think we need a lot of kindness and then courage and forbearance and consistency, right? So for me, what works quite good in this area is focusing on this determination to be free. Basically starting to see where I'm getting stuck in my emotions and thoughts. And generally, where do we get stuck? We start with our afflictive emotions, the way we misperceive ourselves and others, aversion that arises because of that, clinging. It's mostly referring to clinging in this verse, right? Or attachment. Jealousy and pride. These are the main 5 afflictive emotions that more or less run our behaviors. And these are all based on a sense of trying to remedy fear or fears that we have and trying to meet expectations of what we think are going to bring happiness. So all of these 5 kind of are built on hope and fear or expectation and fear. So how do we sort of move towards renunciation? We start to question in gentle ways what's actually providing happiness for us. And this isn't like a exercise of like, oh, like my car really sucks, so I need to get a new one, or my partnership isn't working out, so I need to get a new one. It's not really talking about that. It's talking about the underlying afflictions of aversion and clinging themselves. So it's a deeper dive, and this takes some time. So either way, we find the determination to be free by seeing more and more of the dissatisfaction involved in these everyday experiences, right? And as I said before, or maybe I didn't say it, it doesn't mean we can't enjoy life. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy the cake you like, the cake you like, or the food you like, or whatever it is, or that beautiful view at the beach. It just means we're understanding this is a temporary satisfaction, and we're not looking to it or for it to provide more long-lasting happiness for us. And this is a subtle point, but either way, we can still sort of be with life, but we start to look at it in a different way. And again, this is going to get filled in later, because what do we do instead? We practice the dharma, right? We develop bodhicitta, we develop meditative awareness, compassion, loving kindness, and we cultivate wisdom, or the wisdom of emptiness. So it's not like we just give up something and we're left with that. No, it actually moves us to cultivating constructive things, right? And in the foundations of Buddhism, we're taught to abandon what causes harm and to move towards virtue that causes happiness, but not the fleeting happiness, more long-lasting happiness. But we have to learn what that is. And as we learn what that is, we also begin to reduce our, I guess you could say, energy into, or payment into, or enthusiasm for putting energy into fleeting happiness. If it comes, great, but we don't put as much energy into it. So anyways, going back to the beginning of the verse, whilst lacking pure renunciation, there's no way to pacify the continual thirst for pleasure in the ocean of samsara. So it's just kind of pointing out another way of what I'm saying. If we don't look at this, we're going to continually be bound by our habit patterns, right? So we need to question at some point, is this habit pattern serving me for a long-lasting happiness or not? And again, part of this is we have to understand what long-lasting happiness is through the dharma, right? And these are the factors that come through the development of love, compassion, as I said, the cultivation of wisdom, all of that. And technically, happiness is kind of like, we'll use it in a modern context, but it's not really a traditional way to describe this. But either way, I'm just using it here so we have something to relate to. And this, what does renunciation there do? What does renunciation mind do? It actually resolves this continual thirst for pleasure, because we can see we're on this wheel where we're repeating the same thing again and again and again. And as we get older, it not only does that get exhausting, but it just sort of gets, it can get kind of darker in this way, right? We can become depressed because we never get what we want. We thought we wanted this, but when we got it, it didn't prove to be as fulfilling as we thought. That's what this is talking about, right? So we realize, okay, that's not the end all, meaning it's not an end. We just have to realize that itself is a dead end, but that opens up a whole nother possibility through contemplating, studying, and realizing the dharma, right, through meditation. So, and then it goes into sort of this reflection on all living beings. And since all living beings are bound by their craving for existence, you must begin by finding the determination to be free. So it's starting to bring in bodhicitta already, this altruistic mind that we're not only interested in understanding the causes of suffering and removing them for ourselves, we're also interested in helping others. But of course, if we don't do our own work, how are we going to be able to help others in this process? Because we're going to be bound and caught in our own states of samsaric circling mind in sort of, I could say, harmful patterns that don't really go anywhere. They just lead to dead ends. So how are we going to, if we continue that, how can we serve others? We can't. Or how we serve them is going to be very limited, basically. So already Lama Tsongkhapa is bringing in this idea of thinking about renunciation mind, not just as a process for oneself, but how we free ourselves to open up more space to be just a really helpful person in the world and towards our families and friends and communities. And eventually, as awakening approaches, even more useful to them, right? So yeah. So I think I'll stop there so this doesn't get too long. But we're just starting to introduce renunciation mind, what it means, why we would want to do it, basically, because we want to remove the causes of suffering. We want to understand there's certain causes of dissatisfaction and suffering that we're doing. We might not even recognize what the real, foundational problem is, right? And we're looking everywhere, okay, this is the problem. I need to change my job. Oh, I need to move here. I'm not in the right place. Oh, I need to change my diet. Not saying like those things are bad to do. It's just like we're always doing these small remedies trying to get a big result. But all it does is shift, I often think of this shell game that was popular in cities in the 1980s. You go there and they have, I don't know what it was, like 3 cups, and you had to like pick the right cup, but the guy knew how to kind of trick you and it would get your money, somehow. So it's like, I just see my dukkha and suffering as sort of just like a shell game where it's just shifting around. But now we're talking about going beyond the shifting, right? So again, if you're new to this is a big idea. I'm not expecting you to understand this right away, nor did I at the beginning. And I'm still trying to understand this and practice it, basically. But that's the point. We have to start to see, okay, I'm doing these movements that seem to be, I'm looking for a big result, but actually it's just shifting around the suffering, meaning I end one suffering, like having an old car, and I start a new one with a new car. And sure, there's that moment of like, new car, amazing, but then the car is old, right? At some point, not so long in the future, depending on the person. So anyways, just some things to reflect on. And I'll leave you with one thing. As I said, these teachings can be a little bit of a downer, the renunciation mind teachings, but it's a good downer because we have to understand the predicament and start to feel some exhaustion with that. And we have to remember that by seeing a dead end, we can actually see the road that will not be a dead end, that will actually lead to a genuine freedom, as the end of this verse says, finding the determination to be free. So that's the whole point of the renunciation mind teachings. We have to then see, okay, this isn't working out, this sort of shell game, this shuffle game of samsara. What can I do instead? And that's what the whole Buddhist path is. It's the what can you do instead. So I'm going to end here. Thanks so much, everyone.